Purpose Highway is a space for discussions that drive connections toward people's highest purpose to build a better self and a better world. Join me for Season 1, where I start to uncover stories of entrepreneurs and thinkers that are making an impact. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and enjoy today's episode. Hello, everybody. It's Scott Mason here, revving up for another race down the Purpose Highway. And sitting next to me in the front seat today is Frank King. And Frank, I've got you laughing already. He is a former writer for The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. He did that for 20 years. He has been a speaker and a comedian for 34 years. And he is a 7 times TEDx speaker. Very impressive resume. Frank, welcome to the Purpose Highway.
Thank you, Scott. And by the way, Scott is not only a podcast host and a speaker, he's also human jumper cables. You need your car jumped, you don't need another vehicle. Just have Scott grab the post. Red is positive, black is negative. Crank it.
By the way, by the end of this conversation, you and I will have a brief discussion about coffee. But before we get into that, why don't we talk a little bit about the TEDx talks that you give? I recommend that anyone who has a chance to watch those do so. They are indescribably powerful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's true. And one of the things that is most gripping in those talks are the portions that relate to your familial history, particularly your grandma, your great aunt. And I think that those stories lay the groundwork for a lot of the work that you do in your life and a lot of the events that have happened in your life.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we could just start by you telling us a story about grandma.
Well, and what we're going to talk about may bring up strong emotions for your listeners and viewers, so just know that going in. There's no shame if you need to step away and then come back. It's called generational depression and suicide. It runs in families. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. My mother, the way she found my grandmother was she couldn't reach her on the phone. Got worried, went over to the house. My grandmother had closed all the windows and doors, written all the checks for all the bills, addressed the envelopes, stamped them, pinned her will to her house coat so my mother could find it, and sat down at the kitchen table, turned on the gas, and wrote a suicide note. And then my great aunt, a number of years later, my mother couldn't reach her on the phone. So given the family history and the fact that my great aunt was depressed, my mother bundled me at 4 years old into the car, went over to my great aunt's apartment, let ourselves in, and nothing out of place. We got to the kitchen, and all the food that should have been in the refrigerator, an old lock-type refrigerator, the kind with not magnetic strip, but a handle that locked and unlocked. All the food was on the counter, the milk, the butter, the eggs, the cheese. Well, my mother didn't realize what had happened. And my great aunt had crawled into the refrigerator to die by suicide, pulled the door to behind her, and once you're inside a locked refrigerator, there is no way out. But at some point, she decided to try to claw her way out. So I'm holding on my mother's skirt. My mother walks over to the refrigerator, reaches, grabs a handle, opens the door, and my great aunt falls out of the refrigerator and pins me to the floor. You know, broken, bloodied nails, face frozen that last moment of terror, and we're nose to nose on the floor. And apparently I screamed for days and days and days. And my mother said she prayed that, she said she'd give up 10 years of her life if I could forget what I'd seen. And interestingly enough, I did. It got walled off in my head somewhere. And I was years later, 2012, 2013, the family created a myth that if I ever asked about my great aunt and that refrigerator, they were to tell me that when we opened the door, your great aunt was sitting in there, hands folded in prayer, looking very serene. I told that story to my cousin when I was back in Raleigh, who's 10 years older, so he would remember the incident. When I said folded in prayer, serene, he goes, serene my ass. The old bat fell out and pinned you to the floor. Well, it all came rushing back. It was hiding behind some, some firewall somewhere. And when he said that, all of a sudden I'm 4 again, pinned to the floor, nose to nose with my great aunt. Mm-hmm. So that was that. Plus, I came awfully close in 2010 to dying by suicide. We had speaking business dropped off 80%, filed Chapter 7, lost everything we'd worked for in 25 years, and I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger. I tell the audience, and they get a nervous laugh, like, should we be laughing about this? And I followed up with a friend of mine from Philadelphia, Glenn Friesman, was in the audience earlier in January 2020.
Yes.
Came up afterwards. He goes, hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? Hey, man, could you try to sound slightly less disappointed? So that's the humor. That's the comedian. People ask me, do you tell jokes? No, it's not jokes. It's funny personal stories. Like in my first TEDx. I said I went to TED.com to see how other people handle the topic of suicide.
Yeah.
And I figured there'd be dozens of talks. No, 3. 3 talks on suicide. And then it hit me, well, if you're really good at suicide, you're not going to be recording a TED Talk.
Yeah.
Which got a huge laugh from the audience there at the TEDx. So
Yeah.
it's a dark topic, but it makes it a lot more digestible if you leaven it with some tasteful, organic, personal humor.
Yeah.
You give them a little relief along the way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. There's a lot that you just said that I want to unpack.
Okay.
So one of the things with regards to your grandma and your great aunt that you talk about in your TED Talks is the concept of generational depression and suicide. And in a way, it sounds intuitive, right? You had 2 older relatives who committed suicide. And then, as you have just said yourself, as someone who has tasted, who knows what the barrel of a gun tastes like, it's been an issue that you yourself have faced. And we'll talk about that in more detail in a little while. But explain to us what you know about generational suicide. What is it exactly? Do you have any understanding of how and why that happens? And how did that play out in your family or in your own life as you were moving from being a toddler of 4 years old to being an older child, a teenager, and then moving into adulthood?
Well, actually, having forgotten all about it, and I had a good childhood beyond that. My dad died very young, but having one good parent, there are worse things than having one great parent. My mom was a great parent. And I was happy through high school. I almost stayed an extra year in high school because I liked it so much. And back then, back then you could do that. You could actually stay in. I was going to take another.
Really?
Yeah, I was going to take another Spanish class, some more trigonometry because my math skills were not what they should have been. I was going to take typing, life skills.
The only person I've ever heard of that actually wanted to take trigonometry.
Yeah, well, I took it in 12th grade and I was horrible at it. And I thought, I'm going to college. I need. I had to end up taking, math for non-math majors because that's how bad my math was. So I was good till I was 18, and then I went to college. My girlfriend went to college across the country, so we were separated physically, and I didn't realize at the time, I thought I was lovesick, but I believe I was depressed. Looking back, all the symptoms were there. And then we graduated college. We stayed together against all odds. And it looked like, it's, after you date that long, it's either get married or break up, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I wanted to live together, but she didn't. I wanted to lease with an option to buy. She did not.
Yeah.
So we got married, which is a big mistake. Wonderful woman, just not for me. And I went to work in the insurance business because that's what her family did, and that's what she wanted me to do. So I'm essentially living up to her expectations. And I was not going to open mic night at the Comedy Store, which is where I really believed I belonged.
Yeah.
Age 24-ish, I realized I'm depressed and suicidal because I'm married to the wrong woman, working in the wrong business, and not doing what I really should be doing, which is comedy. And so I came to the conclusion that if I stayed put, stayed married, stayed in the insurance business, I was going to kill myself sooner rather than later. Second thought was, wait a minute, I could divorce my wife, quit my job, try comedy. If it works, great. If it doesn't, hell, I can still kill myself. That's how I got into comedy. I had absolutely nothing to lose.
Interesting. Frank, going back a little bit, when did you discover that you were funny? And when and how did the comedy bug hit you?
4th grade. my family is terribly nearsighted. It's called we're myopic. Myopia is nearsighted.
Yeah.
I had a joke in my act that my family was descended from the people of the island of Myopia, and which was conquered over and over because they never saw the bad guys coming. I mean, really,
True myopian.
yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, really, and in the fourth grade, I got glasses. Well, this is 1964. There were no fashion frames. They're very fashionable now. They were Ray-Bans, black plastic, very fashionable now. But back then, and I hated them. Didn't want to wear them, but my teacher knew that I had to have them to see the board.
Yeah.
So she decided the best way to handle this was get me in front of the class, turn me away from the class, have me put my glasses on, turn back to the class. Everybody sees Frank in his new glasses all at once. Get it out, 4 eyes, whatever. It was probably a good plan. But she puts my glasses on, turns me back to the classroom. She looks down and she goes, "See, you look intelligent." And I looked up and said, "Yes, that would explain all the laughter." And she told me years later it was the funniest thing a child had ever said to her before or since. And at that moment in fourth grade, I decided I'm going to be a comedian. Not sure how that
Really?
Yeah, I'm not sure how you do that. And then after I got divorced and, quit the insurance business, tried comedy, I'm on stage the first time doing my little 5-minute set.
Yeah.
Halfway through, inside my head, unbidden, came this sentence. I heard this: "You are home." And I've only had that a couple of places in my life where I felt like, I just got round peg, round hole. This is where I belong.
Yeah.
And my second thought was, I'm going to do this for a living. Again, I have no idea how. And if I'd known how difficult it was at that moment, I might not have tried. But I did. And I met my second wife, and I got 10 weeks booked on the road. And I said to my girlfriend then, my wife now, "I'm going on the road to be a stand-up comedian. Do you want to come along for the ride?" Figuring she'd go, "Oh, hell no." And she goes, "Yes." So we gave up the apartment and our jobs, put a bunch of stuff into storage, and took off. And we were on the road together for 2,629 nights in a row.
Okay, can I just say as an aside, I love your wife. I don't even know anyone that would respond that way. She's got to be my best friend. Where were you? And where were you when you decided to make this move? And give us a sense as to what it was like living on the road like that with your wife every day.
Well, it's what kind of thing that either makes a marriage or blows it completely apart. Because we had to develop kind of emotional shorthand because we're in the car for majority of that time going from place to place.
Yeah.
And if you get mad, the only place to go is the back seat. So we agreed that if we were in a bad mood, we had to let the other person know, "Hey, listen, this morning I'm in a bad mood," so you don't get blindsided. And then if we had an argument, we had to settle it very quickly. And if we were wrong, we had to apologize very quickly. That was kind of our handbook for being each other 24/7, 365 for 7 years.
Wow.
And it was
So
a great adventure.
pandemic is nothing, right? After that?
No, I've said to people, they go, how are you handling the pandemic? I said, well, I've had 2 aortic valve replacements, a double bypass, a heart attack in the woods by myself, no cell service. I have major depressive disorder and chronic suicidal ideation, and on the old Star Search with Ed McMahon, I lost to a puppet. So this is not the worst thing that's ever happened to me.
Wait, stop for a second. Ed McMahon, Star Search, and a pup. Come on, you've got to tell us about this.
Well, and you know what I can do is I'll send you a link to the video. Somebody put it up on YouTube. You can see me losing to the puppet.
What?
Yeah.
What was it like being on Star Search?
Oh, it was great. I won my first 2 episodes. I shouldn't have won the second one. When they put my scores up and I beat the young woman who had a much better set than I did, the audience actually goes, "Ooh." But, of course, they edited that out. They didn't leave that in. So I shouldn't have won the second round. And then the third round, I recognized a guy because I worked with him in Vegas. It was a ventriloquist, not even a great ventriloquist, but the duck is just to die for cute. And I approached him after my second show, and I said, "I hope you're just here to watch." And he goes, "No, it's you and me tomorrow, big guy." Anybody but the duck I could have taken. But the puppet, yep.
Yeah. That's brutal, man. That's brutal.
Yeah, well, and over the summer, the ventriloquist died. Yeah, the duck's still working.
Oh, wow. So anyway, that was an incredible little digression. Thank you for indulging me. You're on the road with your wife. And tell me about what happens next and how is your journey playing out and how does the backdrop of depression play out at the same time, if at all?
No, not at all. I mean, I was a little moody at times, but I always thought it was carbohydrate related. I had, had a cinnamon bun, then my blood sugar crashed. I had some orange juice. I don't recall being depressed on the road with her because, it was an amazing adventure. We would go from club to club, and a lot of the clubs put you up in a 3-bedroom condo. They call it the comedy condo. So you're not just working with Jerry Seinfeld or Dennis Miller or Adam Sandler. You're coming back to the condo with them, and you live with them for a week. And, some people were a little upset that I was the opening act and I brought my wife along. But after a while, when they got to know my wife, this is what would happen. I'd be walking up the sidewalk to the comedy condo, and I'll do the impression of the comedian I'm working with. Hey, Frank, where's Wendy? They got it where they liked her better than they liked me. So
ego check. Wow.
Yeah. And she was with me almost the entire time. She had to go home and take care of her parent once, another parent once. But for the most part, she was with me day in, day out. And, we're in our mid-20s to mid-30s. We pitched it all and just went. And, I mean, who doesn't want to just go, screw it. We're out of here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it was, it was difficult. We took the back roads, stayed off the interstate, so we saw a lot of America that you don't normally see. Stayed in little mom-and-pop hotels,
Yeah. Wow.
Went to Kitschy, like the world's deepest hand-dug well. There was an exhibition coal mine. We rode in a coal train into a coal mine. I mean,
I love it.
Yeah, all the Kitschy sort of,
Yeah. The things that make America great in their own way, right?
Exactly.
Well, how did you end up working for The Tonight Show? I know everyone who is watching or listening to this is secretly wondering that, so I'm just getting it out there.
No, what was happening was, when I went on the road, Jay Leno had just been made permanent guest host. And Johnny would pull up on a Friday night and tell his staff, I'm taking next week off, which meant Monday was Best of Carson, a rerun, and then Tuesday through Friday was Jay's, guest hosting, and he had to have 18 jokes a night, 4 nights. So he started hiring road comics, as contractors to write jokes on spec and send them in. And I was sending 2 dozen topical jokes in a day and getting a couple on in the monologue every week. And then when he got the show for real, they let most of the contract labor go, but I stayed on, and I wrote with him until he left The Tonight Show. Again, the dream was that you do such a good job when they needed a new writer to come inside and join the Writers Guild, that they pluck you from obscurity. And a couple of guys did get plucked from obscurity and went inside to write, on site. But I never able to grab the golden ring on that, but it was still worth the effort.
And it sounds, though, despite what I would imagine would be a really fun experience, high profile and exciting, to be very, very stressful, too. I mean, look, my experience as a comedian is very limited. Standing up in front of a classroom and having people not laugh at me, and taking a stand-up comedy class that I was so terrified, when I did my routine at the end, that my right leg, I remember, quaking like a rubber band. And the hardest part about it was coming up with the jokes. A, coming up with jokes. B, coming up with jokes that were actually even remotely plausible, as humorous to maybe 1 or 2 people on the entire planet. What was it like having to produce jokes at that level, in that environment, in that time?
Well, it actually was not as hard as it sounds. I believe that my depression and thoughts of suicide are simply the flip side of my creativity, imagination, comic ability. And, there was always new source material, because we were writing jokes out of the newspaper. So I would just grab a USA Today and a New York Times, whatever the local paper was where I was, and I'd just go through there, and the jokes oftentimes wrote themselves, because it's all topical. And then what I would do is, I would record on a VCR Leno's monologue. And the next morning I would listen for 2 things. 1, to see if he bought any of my jokes. And 2, I want to see what premises he liked. So I wrote down all the premises for the 18 jokes. And what I would do is I'd go back through and see if I couldn't write a better joke. Because we already know he likes the premise. And the one I remember is, Switzerland, they've opened up a condom factory. You really want to get a condom from a country that makes cheese with holes in it? I thought, well, there's got to be a better Swiss joke than that. So I wrote, they opened a condom factory. Of course, the Swiss, it's not just a condom. It's a condom, it's a corkscrew, it's a screwdriver, it's nail clippers. So, you learn tricks and techniques because you're right, 12 to 24 jokes, but it's like any other muscle. You keep working. I was thinking funny all day long. I can teach you to write stand-up. I can teach you to perform it. What I cannot teach you to do is process the incoming information the way I do. And the way I explain it to people who are not comics, I ask them, you ever do a movie? And something happens on the screen. And you laugh out loud. And when you stop, you realize you're the only one laughing. You got the joke. That's what my life's like 24/7, 365. It's always looking for the play on words, the funny phrase.
Right.
Somebody broke the control law on it off long ago. I can't stop it.
But, I think that there's something you said a minute ago that I wanted to dive in a little bit more deeply to. And that is the concept of the creativity and the humor being the flip side to depression and suicidal ideation. Explain to those who might be watching or listening who might not have that yin and yang within them, what exactly that looks like and what that means.
Well, I did a TEDx talk called Mental with Benefits, the Evolutionary Advantages of Mental Illness. 2019, I think. And because everybody I ever met who had mental illness, who wasn't completely dysfunctional, had some kind of, superpower. They were great artists or writers or comedians or musicians or politicians. And I thought, this cannot be a coincidence. So I began to do research, and sure enough, a lot of people who are famous, infamous, wealthy, have mental health issues. And so I said to the audience, what if those of us with a mental illness are not living with a genetic mutation, but an amazing evolutionary adaptation? And what if it is, as Malcolm Gladwell says of such things in his book David and Goliath, a desirable disadvantage? You would never wish it on anybody. However, it does come with certain advantages. The whole premise was, if we could change the frame for children, yes, you have a disability, mental disability. What the adults never tell you is you have some mental abilities your peers can't touch. And so you want to treat the mental disability and then wrap your arms around, embrace and energize the mental ability, thereby changing the frame for the young person, for their peers. That was the purpose of doing the TEDx, plus the fact I couldn't believe that it was a coincidence that all these talented people also. And this past week in Inverse Magazine, they found that the genes for depression and intelligence overlap.
Fascinating.
Yeah, the people who are depressed oftentimes are more intelligent.
Yeah.
The danger there, by the way, is, and they mentioned this before they did the abstract, if you're too intelligent, and I've got two friends like this, you believe you can think your way out of mental illness. And the only way is to feel your way out of it. But because they're so smart, that they just, and they've been wheel spinning for years and not getting anywhere, thinking there's got to be a way to get out of this. I can think my way out of this.
Yeah. And it's interesting, again, I don't want to put myself in the genius category because I'm not, but I do have strong reasoning abilities. And when it has come to various dysfunctions that I've had, that is sort of the default that I've gone to. Oh, I can think my way out of this, or I can think a way around it. The skill of actually connecting with the feelings that are behind the behaviors that have needed changing has been something that I've had to gradually A, learn to accept, B, learn to become in touch with and process, and then C, develop as a self-discipline with regards to the connection, so that it isn't a skill that I gradually lose as I default to, my pre-connection with my feeling way of thinking. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
No. Just you.
Just me. It's me alone in the world. I'm sorry, everybody. I was trying to bring out something that maybe someone could relate to. You burst my bubble, man.
Sorry, man. Yeah, so what I've done is I used to say I battle depression, but that's not accurate because battle implies I can win, and I can't. I can lose and kill myself. I can tie and stay alive, kind of like an uneasy truce like North and South Korea, but I can't win. So rather than resist, and fight the depression, I use an Aikido approach. Aikido is a martial art where you blend with
Yep.
your partner's energy.
Yeah.
In other words, you don't try to block the punch. You blend with the energy behind the punch in a circle, actually. And then you when you feel you've taken their balance, you reverse the circle and lower them to the ground. So with my depression, I just try to blend with the energy and move forward rather than push back against it for, how many ever days, 2-3 days. So, it's difficult, but it has a lot of energy. So it's, you can harness it and do the best you can.
You mentioned much earlier in the interview that there were some challenges that happened around the time of the Great Recession. I wanted to maybe skip ahead a little bit, but just in terms of making the chronology clear for anyone who's watching or listening, were you still with The Tonight Show when that happened, or had you switched careers? And if so, what did that career switch look like? And then maybe walk us through exactly what happened around the time of the Great Recession.
Well, I was still doing stand-up, and I was also doing professional speaking. I had a motivational speech and a networking speech. Nothing with any real solid content like suicide prevention, with action items and able-tos and how-tos. And let's see, it was 2010 was a recession. And what happened was the meeting planner said to me, Frank, we love you, but we can't pay you the kind of money we've been paying you just to be funny. You need to teach us something. So I looked at the generational depression and suicide, my own near attempt. And I thought, you know what? I could teach suicide prevention. So I took Sally Spencer Thomas's Working Minds. Suicide prevention is a workplace health and safety issue. QPR, question, persuade, refer. Mental health first aid. So I took 3 different classes to give me the nuts and bolts of how do you spot signs and symptoms, depression, thoughts of suicide. And began speaking on suicide, along with other things I was speaking. And what really saved us, because the speaking business took a while to come back, I'd been doing cruise ships. And we got just enough cruise ship work through the year to keep us afloat, after the bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And then as I began to speak more, I was able to raise my fee. And then when I became a suicide prevention speaker only, I raised it again. And I did what they recommend you do in speaking. You pick a lane, just one lane, and the riches are in the niches. Find your 4 or 5 ideal clients and market to them. So in other words, it's the old saw about go deep, not wide.
Yeah, yeah.
In the first recession, I tried all kinds of side hustles to make money when I should have gone deep into the speaking business. My mistake. So this time I was ready. I'm like, no, I'm not doing any side hustles. I'm just redoubling my efforts in what I'm doing already. And mental health, not doing a lot of marketing for speaking right now because live events are few and far between. So the TEDx coaching that I do, that I ramped that up from like 4 or 5 clients, and I've got 16 TEDx coaching clients. So that's so those are my 2 profit centers: the speaking and the TEDx coaching. And when the speaking comes back, I'll shift some of the marketing back to mental health speaking.
Right. When you first began comedy, and you said you had that voice inside of you, it almost sounds to me like in that moment you found your purpose, being comedy.
Yeah.
I also see you so committed to suicide prevention and suicide awareness work that sounds like a purpose to me too. Are both of those your purpose? If you had to describe what your purpose is, what is it? And how did you come to understand exactly what that purpose is that you're living right now?
Comedy was my purpose and my passion until I began to speak on suicide prevention. So comedy is part of the, part of my speaking. But my passion is suicide prevention and saving lives. My goal is to make talking about depression, thoughts, suicide as easy as talking about the weather.
Yeah.
By starting the conversation. Now my purpose on the planet is to start the conversation on suicide, give people permission by doing that to give voice to their own feelings and experiences without recrimination. I come in, I give them cover to talk about it. Because what I've discovered is people don't talk about it unless you bring it up, and then everybody's got a story.
Yeah.
So that's my job, is to come in and say to somebody, I come in, let my freak flag fly, round up my tribe. I go up on stage to be vulnerable. I shed a tear when I'm telling a story. A guy up on stage showing emotion. Oh, dear God. Very powerful. Vulnerability, as Brene Brown says, superpower.
Yep.
She also said, and I've said this many times different ways, she said it most elegantly, and I believe this about myself, that I'm so comfortable in my darkness, I can sit comfortably with you in yours.
It's funny because when people come to me with advice seeking advice about how to more effectively connect to an audience or more effectively speak, a common syndrome that I will see is exactly what you're talking about. They want to project an image of positivity and light to such an extent that the audience can't relate, because inside we all know that we have inner darkness. Whether we're willing to accept that or not, or whether we're willing to throw that out into the world or not, that's a different story. But we all know that we have it inside if we're in any way honest with ourselves.
Well, and it happens all the time. It happened this morning on a podcast. I was talking to a woman, I can't remember the subject of her podcast, but we were talking about mental health. And she admitted that she had in the past, not that long ago, had serious thoughts of suicide. She goes, and I don't think I've ever told anybody that. I said, well, I don't feel bad that it happens to me all the time. I don't think I've told anybody that. But my job is to be a safe space for that kind of thing. Guy called me up the other day, depressed, suicidal, and just in passing, and then I think a normal person would have let this go by. He goes, I just checked the Amtrak schedule. I said, okay, I'm not going to ask you not to kill yourself. What I would ask you to do is not do it that way. Because undoubtedly, when you step on the tracks, you and the engineer are going to lock eyes, and their life will never be the same. So don't die and take somebody's life in addition.
So. It reminds me, there is I think it was a New York Post newspaper cover that had a photo of someone crawling out of the subway just as the train was approaching. And apparently a few minutes after the photo was taken, there was a collision. And you can see the look on the conductor's face. Now, in this case, it was a man who probably had been pushed in and who was trying to get out. But at the same time, it gives you a sense of the impact that might have on someone's life. That being said, he raised something with you and you responded. And one of the great takeaways from your speeches that I would like you to share with us is how exactly people should not respond if a suicidal ideation is presented to them verbally, and what they should do. I honestly would not have known or had any idea how to respond had I not watched one of your TEDx speeches that gives this really valuable information. So take it away.
Well, let's start with depression. You suspect somebody's depressed, or they say they're depressed. Here's what you don't say. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Turn that frown upside down. Have you tried fish oil? I know. Can't tell you how many times. What you do say is, I'm here for you and I mean it. I know you're not lazy, crazy, or self-absorbed. I know that depression is a mental illness. Now, here's the good news. With time and treatment, things will inevitably get better. I'll take the time, help you get the treatment, and then you have to ask them, are you having thoughts of suicide? And let's say they say they are. Here's what you don't say. You're just looking for attention. You're being melodramatic. Nobody who talks about it ever does it. What you do say is, do you have a plan? And if you have a plan, what is your plan? And if it's detailed, time, place, method, you need to get them on the phone with the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, or texting to the text line. Text the word help to 741-741. And if they won't pick up the phone, you pick up the phone. The volunteer will probably do their best to get the phone into the hand of the person in crisis. Now, let's say they are suicidal, got a plan, but it's not particularly well formed. And this is not a textbook anywhere. A friend of mine and I, as a psychiatrist, came up with this. So they don't really have time, place, method, you know.
Yeah.
So my next question would be, well, tell me, are you going to kill yourself? And if they say no, and I think this may be the most important question, you say, okay, then tell me why not. Make them give voice to whatever it is that's keeping them here. My friends, my family, my animals, whatever. Just make them give voice to what's keeping them on the planet. So that's the protocol that I teach. It's QPR, question, persuade, refer, a little bit of mental health first aid, tossed in.
Yeah, yeah. And, you never know when that might come into play. Just as an example, there was he was an attorney for many years. I oversaw a staff of people that did administrative litigation. And it was litigation that involved a very sensitive social welfare subject matter. And an administrative law judge made a decision during one of the litigations that was occurring, and there was a very tragic outcome that would not have happened had her decision been written a different way. Suffice it to say that. And what happened was, when she was given the news of this tragic outcome that really was a result of her decision, apparently she went to the top of the roof and was in a place where she might have jumped off. And fortunately, that didn't happen. There was someone involved in the building who had the ability to navigate the situation. But part of why I feel so strongly that pieces of advice like what you're giving now has true value is that you never know when you might be facing a situation exactly like the one I was describing.
Yep. People have asked me, I've pulled over the side of the road. There's a guy standing on a bridge looking down at the traffic going underneath. And I always tell people, go with your gut. So I drove by him at 55 miles an hour, and I saw him. And I thought, he's not just a tourist. He's not watching traffic to be watching traffic. He's going to jump. And so I pulled over, and I walked back, and sure enough, and then the police arrived shortly thereafter. But he goes, man, I'm whatever, I'm depressed, I'm suicidal. I said, no kidding, so am I. What are the odds? I said, I have major depressive disorder and chronic suicidal ideation. And it's that Sun Tzu art of war thing. You say to your opponent or whatever, or do the thing they least expect. Don't jump. You got too much to live for. Depressed and suicidal. Me too. Son of a gun. Small world. So, and he didn't jump, by the way. The cops came and they took him to the Johnson unit, whatever, the mental health unit. Hopefully he's still alive today.
I hope so too, man. And I'm just sort of laughing because the creativity. I'm trying to imagine myself in that situation and how I would respond. It is so out of the box, and what do you say? A little bit earlier, we talked about coffee. Again, those who watch your TEDx speech, say that we'll see that you have some comments about coffee. The last thing I've been told people need when they're around me is coffee. But tell us a little bit about your thoughts about coffee and how this relates to the whole topic.
Well, I believe it's the mother's milk of motivation. Coffee is. I have an illness called excessive daytime sleepiness. It's kind of a second cousin to narcolepsy.
Really?
I get really sleepy driving, even in the morning after a couple of cups of coffee. And that's dangerous.
Yeah.
Driving drowsy is almost as dangerous, if not as dangerous, as driving drunk.
Oh, yeah.
And in the year 2000 in Southern California, I was coming home from Orange County to San Diego, and I was going 65 miles an hour down Interstate 5, and I fell asleep. And I woke up.
Oh, my.
I didn't know where I was. I oversteered left, oversteered right, and over I went. Twice. I rolled it twice. Fortunately, it was an old 4Runner with a roll bar in the back. That's the only reason I'm sitting here today.
Wow.
But I was always a big coffee drinker. My entire family. That's something else we share. We all nap and we all drink coffee. And now I know why. Because we're dealing with this excessive daytime. I was the only kid in kindergarten who, when I laid down on my little mat, back when they used to do that, you take a nap.
Absolutely.
I'm out.
Wow.
My teacher said, Mrs. King, I got to go probably kick him to wake him up. All the other kids are just fidgeting for however long. I'm like, smell you later. Boom, I'm out. So coffee is, I make coffee concentrate. It's a coffee toddy. You put in the grounds and cold water, so hot water never touches the grounds, and you strain it through a filter, and it makes coffee that's all the acid is locked in the grounds. So it's like drinking caffeinated spring water. It doesn't hurt your stomach.
Oh.
And I start my day with a double shot. I wake up, double shot of coffee, lay back down, and just let my mind go for anywhere up to an hour. I read about it. I mean, I've been doing it for a long time, but I read an article in Fortune magazine, I think. Somebody from Scandinavia said it's the lost art of doing nothing. Of just lying there and letting your brain go wherever, And oftentimes I'll put a question into my head at night. I need a tagline for so-and-so. And I go to sleep. Next morning I wake up, I'm lying there 15, 20 minutes in, it bubbles up. Oh my God, that's perfect.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it's apparently when you're in that sort of half-wake, half-sleep state, the blood's moving back and forth between the hemispheres of your brain more easily. And that's why the psychiatrist told me that's why you're more creative.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it's just part of my routine. I just lie there and do nothing.
I love it. Well, I'm taking notes, and particularly this sort of cold coffee recipe I may have to incorporate into my repertoire. So thank you for that.
It's a coffee toddy, Toddy. You can get it on Amazon. I'm telling you, it'll change your life.
Yeah, and I'm looking for my life to be changed, especially by that. Frank, we could talk all afternoon and into the night. Unfortunately, we can't. And I know people watching or listening to this are going to want to hear more about you, more from you, and read more about you. Where can they find information about you? Tell us, please.
The Mental Health Comedian. The Mental Health Comedian is my website. I also have yourtedxcoach.com because I coach people to get TEDx talks. And one of my students, I got a text from him while we were chatting. He made the audition round for TEDx University of Essex in London. So he may be going to London later on this spring to do a TEDx.
Incredible.
Hopefully.
That is wonderful.
Yeah, and it's a mental health topic, and he's going to do really well. So yourtedxcoach.com or thementalhealthcomedian.com. And at thementalhealthcomedian.com, volume 1 of our book on men's mental health.
Yeah.
I narrate it for Audible, and I had to make me a separate MP3 copy that you can download for free at my website. If you'd like to, hear me narrate the first book of the men's mental health book series.
And I think that would be time very well spent.
Thank you.
Frank, it has been great taking a ride with you today. Thank you so much for joining us. And for everyone watching or listening, I will see you next time for another ride down the Purpose Highway. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Join our community today at purposehighway.com and subscribe to get notified when new episodes go live. Scott Mason, checking out.